It was a Tuesday evening when I received the text. I was sitting on the couch, finalizing time off for the Reynolds Family Reunion. Tom and I had been planning it for months. Custom t-shirts were even ordered. Then, my phone lit up with a message from Diane, my mother-in-law. "Elena, dear, we need to discuss the reunion arrangements. The family has decided it would be best if you sit this one out. Family only this year. Tom can still come, of course." I stared at the words, frozen. Family only. How was I not family after 3 years of marriage? After all the dinners, smiles, and effort to fit in? I couldn't make sense of it. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. 4 years ago, I met Thomas Reynolds at a charity gala in Chicago. I was there representing my marketing firm, and he was attending with his parents and their country club friends. Tom immediately stood out, not just because of his sharp, tailored suit, but because he seemed just as uncomfortable with the pretentiousness of the event as I was. We bonded over sneaking extra appetizers and making up backstories for the guests who looked most likely to own yachts they couldn't sail. It wasn't long before we were engaged, and I was introduced to the Reynolds family. Tom had warned me about his family before. "They're a bit old-fashioned," he had said. But I had no idea what I was walking into when I first visited Cedar Pines Cottage, the Reynolds family vacation home on Lake Michigan. The cottage was a sprawling lakefront property, with weathered cedar shingles, a massive stone fireplace, and windows that captured the vibrant blue hues of the lake. Tom's family had owned it for 2 generations, passed down from his grandfather. It was sacred ground for the Reynolds clan. 50 years this summer, Tom had told me, his eyes shining with nostalgia. "This place means everything to us." At the time, I couldn't help but admire what it must be like to have a place that held so many memories. My own family had always been loving and warm, but we never had the luxury of a vacation home. My parents, Sophia and Miguel, had immigrated from Mexico, building their restaurant business from the ground up. Our family gatherings took place around the dinner table of our modest suburban home, where laughter filled the air and the smells of my mother's cooking made every holiday special. In contrast, the Reynolds family gatherings seemed rigid and cold. Diane, Tom's mother, was always impeccably put together, her words carefully measured. Richard, his father, was distant, more interested in business connections than familial bonds. Tom's siblings, Megan and James, were polite enough but kept their distance, speaking in a language I couldn't seem to understand. For 3 years, I tried to fit in. I learned how to play bridge because Diane loved it. I memorized Richard's favorite wines. I listened to Megan talk about her law firm's latest victories, and I did my best to keep up with James's medical jargon, even when his responses made me feel like an outsider. But nothing seemed to work. Every year, the family reunion at Cedar Pines felt like an unspoken reminder that I was still just a guest in their world. When we got married, I thought things might change. After all, I was family now, wasn't I? But my first reunion as Tom's wife didn't go as planned. I made the mistake of using the wrong fork at dinner, laughed too loudly at Richard's joke, and suggested a new recipe instead of sticking to Diane's traditional menu. I felt the sting of rejection in every glance, every comment that wasn't quite so warm. Then came the message that would change everything. Diane's text, uninviting me from this year's reunion. My heart dropped, a mixture of confusion and hurt settling in. I had been excluded. The words on my phone seemed to burn through me, as I realized that after 3 years of trying, I still wasn't seen as part of their family. Tom was furious when I showed him the message. He immediately called his mother, but her response only deepened my sense of rejection. She said the reunion needed to be intimate, but when Tom pushed her for a real reason, she hinted that James's new girlfriend would be joining the family, yet she still couldn't find room for me. That night, Tom's determination to stand by me became clear. "Elena is my family," he had said, his voice firm, refusing to attend the reunion without me. That evening, something unexpected happened. I discovered that Cedar Pines Cottage was for sale. The realization hit me hard. The reunion wasn't about space or traditions. It was about hiding their financial struggles. The Reynolds family didn't want me there because they were secretly selling their precious cottage, and I might notice the hushed conversations and paperwork being signed. The anger that had simmered inside me now turned into a cold, hard resolve. I couldn't let them sell the cottage without understanding why they had excluded me, without facing what had been happening behind the scenes. I didn't tell Tom immediately. Instead, I called my father, Miguel. He listened quietly as I explained the situation, his calm voice steadying me. "Send me the listing, mija," he said, his tone serious. "I'll take care of this." I didn't know it yet, but my father was about to turn this moment of betrayal into a business opportunity, one that would give us back something the Reynolds family had been unwilling to share: the cottage. The next morning, my father moved quickly, sending in an offer to buy the property. It wasn't just a business transaction. It was personal. This was our way of taking a stand. The family dynamics shifted. Tom called his siblings, who feigned ignorance about my exclusion. They were, as usual, not helpful. Megan had a slightly sympathetic response, but James simply shrugged it off. We were on our own. That night, my parents arrived at our apartment, bringing takeout from their restaurant and a serious look on their faces. They had gathered information about the cottage's sale. They confirmed what I had suspected. The Reynolds were selling Cedar Pines to cover financial losses from Richard's failing investment firm. The property was undervalued, and my father saw an opportunity. "We're going to buy it," he said with calm certainty. "The Martinez family will own Cedar Pines." I was in shock, but I understood why my father had decided to act. This wasn't just about money. It was about proving a point. It was about making a statement. We would not let the Reynolds family treat us like outsiders any longer. "I don't know if this is a good idea," I said, torn between the desire to protect Tom and the fierce urge to stand up for myself. Tom, always supportive, wrapped his arm around me. "You've been trying for years, Elena. They've never seen you as family. But now, they'll know what it means to truly belong." The plan was set in motion. My father's offer was submitted, and we didn't tell the Reynolds anything. Not Diane. Not Richard. Not Megan or James. They would find out after the sale was complete. 2 days later, everything changed. My father's offer had been accepted. The morning after we received the news that Cedar Pines Cottage had officially been sold, Tom and I sat in silence, processing the enormity of what had just happened. While I felt a sense of victory, vindicated in a way I couldn't quite put into words, there was also an undeniable sadness. The cottage had represented so much to Tom and his family. It wasn't just a vacation home. It was a legacy, a symbol of everything they'd worked for and held dear. And now, we owned it. As the days passed, my emotions shifted. The hurt from the exclusion, the betrayal from Tom's parents, still stung, but with each passing moment, the idea of taking ownership of the cottage, of turning it into a home for our family, became more and more real. We had to move forward, and that meant confronting the next challenge: telling Tom's family. Tom, who had always been so fiercely loyal to his parents, now found himself caught between two worlds. He had always known his family was exclusive, but he hadn't realized just how deep their elitism ran until they had rejected me so openly. I could see how torn he was, especially when he called his siblings to break the news. "I think they'll be upset," Tom said, his voice quiet, as he spoke to me that evening. "But I don't think they'll understand what this means, what it really means to us." I didn't blame him for feeling conflicted. He had grown up with these people, loved them in his own way, despite their flaws. But everything had changed. It wasn't just about a piece of property anymore. It was about something much bigger. It was about family, loyalty, and respect. When Diane first called, asking if Tom and I would join them at a restaurant to discuss the situation, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The meeting had been scheduled just days before the sale was finalized, and I knew this conversation would determine everything. Would they accept what we had done? Or would it only drive a wedge deeper between us? We met at a neutral location, a restaurant in downtown Chicago, somewhere neither family frequented regularly. I dressed carefully for the occasion, picking a simple navy dress that my mother had given me for my birthday. It made me feel confident, yet non-confrontational. I needed all the power I could get. "You look beautiful," Tom said, noticing me as I finished getting ready. "I need all the power I can get tonight," I replied with a weak smile, glancing at myself in the mirror. "Remember," Tom said, his voice soft but sure, "we've already won. Whatever happens tonight doesn't change that." He was right, of course. Cedar Pines was now ours. The wheels were already in motion, and the change had begun. Megan and James had already expressed their willingness to move forward, to build a bridge between our two families. We didn't need their approval anymore. But it still felt like a heavy moment to face. Richard and Diane arrived, as expected. Diane was dressed impeccably, her silver hair shining under the restaurant's lights, while Richard looked thinner than I remembered, his proud stature diminished. The tension in the air was palpable, and we exchanged polite greetings, handshakes that lacked warmth. When we sat down, the silence stretched between us, filled only with the clinking of glasses and the soft murmur of background conversations. Tom was the first to speak. "What's going on, Mom? Why are we here?" Diane took a deep breath, her voice tight with control. "This isn't easy for us," she said, her words clipped. "But we've been doing a lot of thinking about the cottage, about the reunion, about a lot of things." "We were wrong," Richard added, his voice more blunt than I'd ever heard. "We were wrong to exclude Elena. We were wrong not to tell you the truth about the cottage." The words hung in the air between us, awkward and unsaid. Tom was the first to break the silence, his tone sharp. "Why didn't you tell us the truth earlier? Why exclude Elena?" Diane flinched at his tone, and I could see her visibly shrink, her earlier confidence crumbling. "We were embarrassed," she finally admitted, her voice softer now. "We couldn't face it. Everything we've worked for, the firm, the house, Cedar Pines, it was all falling apart. And we thought if we had one last perfect reunion, we could preserve the memory of that. But having someone who wasn't part of our world, someone who might notice that everything was falling apart, felt wrong. You didn't want me there because of the way I was raised, didn't you?" I asked, finally unable to hold back the frustration bubbling inside me. "Because I'm different? Because I'm not from your world?" Richard surprised me by answering directly, his voice matter of fact. "Yes," he said. "It was all of it. Your background, your family, the way you've always been so open. We couldn't see past it. We couldn't see past the differences. And that was our mistake." The honesty of it stunned me, but it also left me with a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time, they were admitting to the truth of their actions. They had shut me out, and now they were finally acknowledging it. Diane turned to me, her voice trembling slightly. "I know it's not enough, but I regret how we've treated you, Elena. We were wrong to treat you as an outsider, and I want you to know that we regret it deeply." I nodded, taking in her words. It wasn't a full apology, not the kind I had hoped for, but it was a start. "Why now?" I asked, my voice low. "Why the sudden change of heart?" Richard met my eyes. Losing the cottage made us realize how much we had been holding on to the wrong things. Tradition, status, appearances. We had to face the truth of our failures. It's not just about the financial collapse. It's about what we've lost in the process. The connection with our own family. Tom looked at them with quiet intensity. "And what are you hoping for now? What do you want from us?" Diane reached across the table, her hand hovering above mine. "We want to be part of your lives," she said. "We want to be part of your family, properly. We know it won't be easy, and we know we have to earn it, but we're asking for a chance." I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Family had always been about tradition, about maintaining an image, but now they were asking for a seat at the table, our table. But were they truly ready to change? Were they willing to put aside years of exclusion and embrace us fully? Yes, it will take time, I said firmly. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. Richard nodded. We understand. We're prepared to do whatever it takes. Thanksgiving arrived, and with it, a sense of unease. Despite the tentative reconciliation we had begun with Richard and Diane, the truth remained. Their transformation, however genuine, was still fragile. Everyone had agreed to meet at Lake Haven, our newly rebranded home, for the first holiday gathering. I had planned for this to be a new beginning for all of us. But as the day approached, doubts lingered. Could we truly put the past behind us? Could we break free from the divisions that had defined our families for so long? Tom and I spent the days leading up to the event preparing. The cottage had undergone several renovations, transforming from a cold, distant place into a warm, inviting home. We had added personal touches, blending our traditions with the Reynolds legacy. My parents had gone all out, bringing their warmth and Mexican heritage to the space. The tamales my mother had made for Thanksgiving were already resting in the fridge, alongside my father's spicy cranberry salsa and rich mole sauce. Our kitchen was filled with the comforting sense of familiar family recipes. Still, I couldn't shake the anxiety. The thought of Richard and Diane walking through the door after everything left me questioning whether we had truly created a place where they could feel welcomed or if they would see it as a house still belonging to their world. As we unpacked the car, the driveway came into view. Our new sign, Lake Haven, glimmered in the soft autumn sunlight. The warm cedar shingle walls of the house stood proudly against the backdrop of towering pines, and smoke curled from the chimney, inviting us in. But as I stepped closer to the front porch, something felt off. The usual placid serenity of the place had been disturbed. The once familiar old wooden sign, Cedar Pines, was gone. Did you take down the sign? I asked Tom, noticing the empty post. No, he said, equally puzzled. Maybe it just blew down in that windstorm last week. We shrugged it off, chalking it up to the weather. But as we went around to check the property, we noticed fresh soil at the base of the signpost, as if someone had been digging there recently. It was strange. But we had more pressing matters to attend to. The Reynolds family was due to arrive soon, and there was still much to be done inside. By the time night fell, we had finished preparing the house. The kitchen was stocked, the rooms ready for guests, and the long dining table set with a colorful cloth and candles. The mood was a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I had worked so hard to make this place a sanctuary for everyone. Would it be enough? The first of the guests arrived, Megan and her children, followed by James and Margot. Then, just before dinner, Richard and Diane arrived together. There was no fanfare, no grand entrance. Just the quiet sound of their footsteps on the gravel driveway. As we greeted them at the door, my heart raced. Tom hugged his mother tightly, offering her a gentle kiss on the cheek. His father gave me a quick nod as he stepped inside, his face etched with a mix of emotions, remorse, anxiety, and something else I couldn't quite place. Dinner began, and the room was filled with chatter. My family and the Reynolds slowly began to fall into a rhythm. My father, with his usual enthusiasm, regaled stories of his childhood, while Megan shared updates about her children's school. It felt surprisingly comfortable, even if the tension from the past was still there, hovering like an invisible weight. At one point, I looked up to see Diane in the kitchen, working side by side with my mother. It was a strange sight. They moved fluidly, as if they had done this 100 times before. The two women, once strangers to each other, now found common ground in preparing the meal. The effort it took for Diane to be there, to be present and engaged, wasn't lost on me. She had reached out in her own way, trying to rebuild the bridges that had once been burned. When dinner was served, the table was a blend of both family traditions, tamales and turkey, mole and stuffing, cranberry salsa and Yorkshire pudding. There was something poetic about it. The old and the new, traditions merged and transformed into something greater than the sum of its parts. My father raised his glass, his voice rich with emotion. To new beginnings, he said. To family, in all its beautiful complexity. To Lake Haven, Tom added, his voice steady. To family, we all echoed, our glasses clinking together. After dinner, the children ran off to play while the adults lingered around the fire. It was then that Diane did something I never expected. She came over to me and gently placed her hand on my arm. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "Thank you for allowing us to be part of this. For giving us the chance to be here, after everything." I looked at her, the words caught in my throat. "You're welcome," I said finally. "We all deserve a chance to move forward. To build something new." The conversation drifted naturally after that. Less tense, more open. Tom and I shared a glance across the room. This was the moment we had been hoping for. Not perfection, but progress. We had taken a risk by buying Cedar Pines, a place that represented everything that had excluded us. But here we were, on the edge of something new and real. The next morning, as the last of the dishes were being cleared and everyone began to settle in, Richard and Diane joined us on the porch. The air was crisp and cold, but the warmth between us felt palpable. Richard cleared his throat. "We've been talking," he said, his voice uncertain. "And we'd like to be part of future gatherings. Not just as guests, but as real family." My heart skipped. Could it be? Were they finally seeing what family meant? Was it truly possible? Tom and I exchanged a glance. "We'd like that," I said softly. "We're ready," Diane added, her eyes filled with something more than just words, something that looked like hope. As the days went by, things started to shift, slowly but surely. Richard and Diane weren't perfect, but they were trying. And for the first time, we weren't just tolerating each other. We were building something together. By Thanksgiving evening, the conversation had turned from awkward pleasantries to real connections. Richard spoke with my father about his firm's struggles. Diane asked genuine questions about my work and family. These weren't just polite exchanges. They were attempts, no efforts, to understand us, to understand me. Dinner continued late into the evening, filled with laughter and warmth. The kids had already gone to bed, but the adults lingered around the table, sipping wine, sharing stories, and talking about the future. Then, as the night wore on, Richard stood up again, his voice soft but firm. "I want to say something," he said. "I know we've made mistakes. And I want to apologize for that. For everything. For how we treated Elena. For how we treated all of you. I just want to be part of your family. If you'll have me." His words were simple, but they meant everything. My heart swelled with emotion. This wasn't just an apology. This was a new beginning. The days after Thanksgiving were a blur. Tom and I were filled with a sense of cautious optimism as we prepared for the next holiday, Christmas at Lake Haven. The reconciliation with Richard and Diane had gone better than I ever imagined, but there were still so many things that needed to be worked through. The journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. By the time Christmas approached, Lake Haven had become more than just a new home. It was a symbol. A place where both of our families could come together, a place to heal, to start anew. And now, the holidays would be our first real test. Would Richard and Diane live up to their promises? Or would the old habits resurface? Tom and I had decided to stay at Lake Haven for the entire holiday break. We were determined to make this Christmas special, our first Christmas truly blending our families. My parents arrived a few days before Christmas, full of enthusiasm and ready to bring their unique touch to the cottage. My father had already begun the preparations for the Christmas feast, which would combine both our traditions and the Reynolds families. The first major sign of change came early on the morning of Christmas Eve. Tom and I were sipping coffee on the porch when Diane arrived at the cottage. It was unexpected, but I could tell she had been preparing for this moment. "Good morning," she greeted us, her voice tentative. "I came early to help your mother with the cooking." She invited me to join her in the kitchen. I thought I'd give it a try. I blinked in surprise. After everything that had happened, after the exclusion and hurt, here she was, standing before me, ready to be a part of something that once felt impossible. I couldn't help but admire her courage. "Of course, you're welcome to help," I said, trying to keep the wariness from my voice. I had been waiting for this day, hoping that Diane would take this step, but I never imagined it would happen so soon. Yet, there she was, rolling up her sleeves, ready to work beside my mother. The day progressed smoothly. My mother and Diane worked in the kitchen side by side, their different styles of cooking surprisingly complementing each other. Tom and I had to keep reminding ourselves that this was a different Diane, one that was willing to learn, to evolve, and to connect. The house was full of family. My parents, Carlos and Maria, and the Reynolds siblings. It felt different. There was no tension in the air, no underlying judgments. The room hummed with laughter, friendly banter, and the clinking of glasses. By the time dinner was served, the dining room was a testament to how far we had come. The long table was adorned with dishes from both families. My mother's tamales, my father's mole sauce, alongside Diane's turkey and oyster stuffing. The conversation was easy, flowing from one subject to the next. Even Richard, who had been quiet for most of the evening, finally spoke up. "I've been thinking about this place," Richard said, his voice somewhat uncertain. "How it feels now. Different from the way it used to be." Tom, who had been on edge all evening, took a deep breath before answering. "It feels right," he said simply. Richard nodded slowly, then turned to me. "Elena," he began, his voice quieter. "I want to apologize. We made a lot of mistakes, and I know I can't undo them. But I want you to know truly that we've seen things differently now. This place, Lake Haven, it's something we've all built together. And I've realized that family isn't about what's been passed down. It's about what we build in the here and now. And I'm grateful for this. For you, for Tom, for all of you." The sincerity in his voice was genuine, and I could feel the weight of his words. This wasn't just a simple apology, it was the start of something much bigger. Richard was beginning to understand that his identity wasn't tied to the family home or the wealth it represented. It was tied to the people around him, to the relationships he chose to nurture. Diane, who had been unusually quiet until then, stood up. "We can't undo what we've done," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "But we can do better. We want to be part of your lives. For real this time." The words, though simple, felt like a turning point. We weren't just going to accept each other on paper, we were going to take action, to show up, to be present. And with that promise, a new chapter began for all of us. The rest of the evening was filled with the kinds of moments I had once thought impossible. The kids ran around playing, laughing as they tried to outdo each other in snowball fights and games of hide and seek. The adults, though tired, found themselves discussing new plans for Lake Haven, for family vacations, and for what future reunions might look like. By the time we sat down to share dessert, the tension that had once plagued our family gatherings was gone. We were a family again, not perfect, not without flaws, but a family united by a shared commitment to move forward, to create something new from the remnants of the past. Later that evening, as the kids settled in for bed, the adults retreated to the deck to watch the fireworks over the frozen lake. The night was cold, but the warmth between us, the warmth that came from a long-awaited reconciliation, made the air feel lighter. "Here's to second chances," Diane said, raising her glass. "May we never take them for granted." "To family," Tom added, his voice filled with a quiet determination. The fireworks exploded over the lake, their vibrant colors reflected in the icy surface, marking not just the start of a new year, but the beginning of a new era for our family. The fireworks symbolized everything we had been through and everything we were still learning to embrace. As the clock ticked past midnight, Tom and I shared a kiss beneath the stars, surrounded by our families. I felt, for the first time, like I truly belonged. Not just as Tom's wife, but as a member of a family that had grown to accept me completely, not despite who I was, but because of it. The months following our first holiday season at Lake Haven were a whirlwind of change. As spring crept across the shores of Lake Michigan, bringing warmth and new life to the world around us, it also breathed new life into our family. The renovation of the cottage had been more than just a physical transformation. It had become symbolic of the shifts happening within each of us. What had once been a place of exclusion and judgment had become a home, A sanctuary where love, respect, and understanding could thrive. Lake Haven was no longer just a house. It had become a symbol of unity. It was the meeting point of two families that had once been divided, each holding on to its own traditions and ideals. Now, those old traditions weren't being erased. They were evolving. My family's love for hearty meals, vibrant colors, and togetherness mixed with the more refined, historical legacy of the Reynolds family, creating something entirely new. As the weather warmed, our families began spending more and more time together. We had regular weekend gatherings, cooking meals together, taking walks by the lake, and sharing memories. What was initially awkward had transformed into something natural. Even Richard and Diane, once so rigid in their ways, began to relax. Richard especially found comfort in the simple things: fishing with my father, talking with Carlos about property values, enjoying the moments that didn't require him to perform or uphold an image. Diane joined my mother and me in the garden, learning to plant vegetables and herbs alongside flowers, a skill I never would have imagined her taking up. Despite these strides, we all knew that the biggest challenge lay ahead. The annual family reunion would be held that summer, and it would be the first time in decades that the Reynolds family had gathered under a new set of rules. There would be no more exclusion, no more traditions based on status or lineage. This year, the reunion would represent the merging of both families, the blending of cultures, traditions, and most importantly, love. The week leading up to the reunion, my mother, father, and I worked tirelessly to prepare for the event. The cottage was transformed into something of a fairy tale. Flowers in full bloom outside, the lake sparkling under the summer sun, and the scent of a traditional family feast in the air. Everyone had a role to play. Carlos and Maria handled the outdoor seating arrangements, while James and Megan worked on the children's activities, making sure the little ones were engaged with games and crafts. Tom and I, of course, oversaw everything, ensuring that the gathering would be something none of us would forget. When the day finally arrived, I felt a rush of emotion as I looked around at the familiar faces, our families, now so entwined. I spotted Richard and Diane standing at the edge of the yard, watching the children run around. They were no longer the distant, judgmental figures they had once been. Diane, her face lined with age and wisdom, caught my eye and gave me a soft smile. It wasn't just a smile of politeness, it was a smile of understanding, of knowing that we had all come so far. "I never thought I'd see the day when our two families could come together like this," Diane said, her voice tinged with wonder. I smiled back, feeling the warmth in her words. "Neither did I admitted. "But here we are." Tom was beside me, his arm casually draped over my shoulder, as we looked out at the crowd. For the first time, I could feel the weight of our journey, of everything we had fought for. And it felt like it was all worth it. The reunion was a resounding success. There was laughter, love, and a sense of belonging that had been sorely lacking in past years. No one was an outsider anymore. We were all family, connected not by blood or heritage but by our choices, our actions, and our shared experiences. As the evening sun began to dip behind the trees, Tom stood up to offer a toast. The firelight flickered behind him, casting a warm glow over the gathered family. "To Lake Haven," he said, raising his glass. "May it always be a place of unity, of laughter, of love. And may we never forget the power of second chances." The clink of glasses echoed through the warm evening air, and I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of a new one. A chapter where our families would continue to grow together, to create new traditions, to build new memories. Later, as the stars twinkled over the lake, Tom and I took a walk down to the water's edge. The reunion had been everything we had hoped for and more. But there was still so much ahead of us. So many more holidays to share, so many more years to build. "Do you think we've truly changed?" I asked him as we watched the reflection of the moon ripple on the lake. He squeezed my hand. "We've started to," he said, his voice soft. "Change doesn't happen overnight. But we've come a long way." I smiled, leaning against him as we watched the peaceful scene before us. "And we'll keep going," I said quietly. "Together." The sound of our footsteps on the gravel path seemed to echo in the night air, a reminder that we were walking a new path, a path that neither of us could have imagined just a year ago.